What do you do when the thing you're reporting shouldn't exist? The Pacific Northwest is home to some of America's most famous missing persons cases and unsolved crimes. But some of those cases are stranger than you can possibly imagine. We're not talking about Bigfoot. We're talking about real-life encounters the police reports and investigators couldn't explain. These are 5 of the most disturbing. Hit that like button if you want more true, disturbing accounts, and subscribe so we can keep digging. What's the scariest real story you've ever heard? The morning of November 8, 1981, dawned crisp and blindingly bright across the southern coast of the Yukon Territory, with the first deep freeze of winter already locking the remote lakes in ice. At Whitehorse International Airport, a modified Beechcraft Baron 58, bearing the fictitious registration CFLX Zobber 4, sat on the apron, its twin engines humming in preparation for what was supposed to be a straightforward 4-hour traverse to Dawson Creek. The small plane carried 4 individuals whose names would become a chilling local legend: Territorial Assembly Majority Whip Robert Red Sterling, Federal Senator Andrew Kincaid from Ontario, Kincaid's attaché, Sarah Vance, and the contract pilot, Captain Liam O'Connell. None of them could have predicted that their takeoff at 9/11 that morning would initiate one of the most exhaustive and expensive search operations in Canadian history, or that their vanishing act would see decades of intense speculation about everything from corporate espionage to unexplained anomalies in the region that would later be chillingly named the Northern Void. Robert Sterling had arrived in the Yukon as the centerpiece of a 72-hour Unity tour, specifically organized to bolster his colleague Andrew Kincaid, who was unexpectedly facing a challenging primary battle against a powerful independent rival. At 65 years old, Sterling was a seasoned political operator in Ottawa, having served multiple terms in the House of Commons and currently wielding considerable influence as a key figure in the governing party's strategy. His appearance in the Yukon was particularly notable because he and Kincaid had a known, albeit cordial, rivalry over recent energy legislation, making this joint tour as much a show of national solidarity as it was about electoral necessity. The two statesmen had spent the previous night at a well-attended gala in Whitehorse, where Sterling had delivered one of his famously stirring addresses on decentralized government and the essential role of the territories in the national identity. Senator Kincaid, at 42, represented a new wave of federal leadership, a man who profoundly grasped both the unique environmental sensitivities facing the nation's northern regions and the complex interplay between resource extraction and Indigenous rights. Originally from Nova Scotia, Kincaid had moved west in the late 1970s, establishing a reputation as a savvy environmental lawyer before winning his Senate seat in 1978. His current campaign was deeply focused on securing federal funding for northern infrastructure while ensuring provincial control over natural resource management against what he often described as overzealous central bureaucracy. The flight to Dawson Creek was planned as the final leg of a 3-city campaign swing that was to culminate in a significant policy address designed to give Kincaid the necessary leverage for the final weeks before the vote. The meteorological prognosis for the flight had indicated marginal instrument flight rules conditions along the mountain-flanked corridor, with low-hanging fog and potential structural ice accumulation in the passes separating the Yukon and British Columbia. Captain O'Connell, the pilot engaged by Aurora Charter Services, was a veteran flyer who had logged hundreds of hours on this specific cross-country route and deeply respected the inherent volatility of the subarctic weather systems. The Beechcraft Baron 58 was a high-performance, twin-engine aircraft deemed highly suitable for demanding northern conditions. It was equipped with the standard avionics for navigating harsh weather and was powered by dependable engines that were common within the northern aviation community. Crucially, however, the aircraft was operating without a fully functional satellite beacon locator, SBL. Despite Transport Canada advisories that had recently recommended such high-power devices for flights over remote, unpopulated terrain. At 9:28 that morning, Captain O'Connell made his final required radio check with Whitehorse Area Control, confirming their altitude and requesting a final update on the cloud ceiling as the aircraft neared the rugged terrain surrounding the Takini Ridge. This brief, routine transmission gave no sign of any operational trouble, and the local meteorological reports at the time indicated conditions were within acceptable flight parameters. The established flight path would carry the Beechcraft over some of the most stunning but unforgiving geography in the north, including high alpine passes where sudden gusts could make flying treacherous and immense swaths of unexplored boreal forest, where a downed aircraft could remain concealed for a lifetime. After that last verbal report, CFLX-C04 disappeared from all air traffic control monitors and never initiated another verified radio transmission, vanishing into the silent wilderness somewhere between Whitehorse and Dawson Creek. When the Beechcraft failed to report its arrival in Dawson Creek by its scheduled time of 1015 p.m., local tower staff initiated standard missing aircraft protocols, attempting multiple times to raise the plane on different frequencies and alerting search and rescue coordination centers about the overdue flight. By mid-afternoon, it became chillingly apparent that a catastrophic event had befallen the aircraft carrying two of the nation's highest-profile political figures. A massive recovery effort was immediately authorized that would eventually involve detachments from the Royal Canadian Air Force, the Coast Guard Auxiliary, civilian air support groups, and dozens of highly skilled bush pilots who freely volunteered their specialized aircraft and local knowledge. The preliminary search operation concentrated on the pre-filed flight plan, paying particular attention to the high mountain valleys and glaciated plateaus where weather-related mishaps were most probable. The coordinated search that ensued would become the most extensive and resource-heavy in Canadian territorial history, ultimately employing over 500 fixed-wing and rotary-wing craft and thousands of personnel over a grueling 45-day period. Naval vessels scanned the waters of the inland fjords and large northern rivers, while military helicopters systematically canvassed the jagged peaks along the planned route. Civilian volunteers dedicated countless hours in light aircraft, methodically scrutinizing every hidden ravine and glacial lip for any sign of the missing Beechcraft. The entire operation was severely hindered by the sheer scale of the northern expanse and the constantly deteriorating weather, which frequently forced aircraft to remain grounded and often limited visibility to mere feet, despite the astronomical resources deployed to find CFLX-I4. Search teams never located so much as a single recognizable piece of fuselage or debris. The failure to discover any physical evidence of the aircraft fueled intense public and media speculation about what could have caused the complete disappearance, with theories ranging from a catastrophic mid-air structural failure in a mountain downdraft to far darker conjectures involving hostile foreign intelligence and politically motivated sabotage. Some journalists observed that Senator Kincaid had been publicly feuding with the powerful head of a large, publicly traded resource company and had called for greater transparency in national resource contracts, leading to rumors that the disappearance might have been executed by powerful private entities seeking to silence a major political irritant. These conspiracy theories gained significant traction due to the absolute lack of any physical remnant from the crash site, which was considered an extreme outlier even by the standards of remote northern aviation disasters, where some wreckage almost always remains. The subsequent investigation into the disappearance uncovered several critical oversights regarding the flight preparation and onboard instrumentation of CFLX-04. The official Transportation Safety Board inquiry noted that the aircraft was carrying a non-operational satellite beacon locator, SBL, despite strong regional recommendations for such devices on flights traversing remote areas. Investigators learned that Captain O'Connell's personal, portable emergency transmitter had been temporarily loaned to another pilot in Yellowknife, and several witnesses reported seeing a nondescript, wrapped object in the pilot's flight bag that bore a superficial resemblance to, but was confirmed not to be, a functional, high-power distress beacon. This crucial gap in emergency technology meant that even if the crew had survived an initial impact, searchers would have received no electronic homing signal to direct them to the possible wreckage. Civilian and military radio operators throughout the North reported detecting sporadic, fractured vocal snippets that might have originated from the missing aircraft during the first few days following the initial disappearance, but none of these unconfirmed reports could be definitively verified or used to meaningfully reduce the colossal search zone. The alleged transmissions contained garbled, stressed voices that some listeners interpreted as desperate pleas for help. But the extremely poor quality and brief duration of the static-filled signals rendered any positive identification impossible. These persistent, yet unconfirmed radio contacts only compounded the profound mystery surrounding the flight, prompting questions about whether the aircraft had survived the initial crisis, only to come down later in a location even more inaccessible than the initial planned route. The political ramifications of the disappearance became immediate and pronounced, as both Sterling and Kincaid remained on the ballot for the upcoming election despite being missing and officially presumed deceased. In a bizarre twist of political fate, both men were re-elected by overwhelming majorities while the intensive search for their plane continued. Robert Sterling's position was ultimately filled by his daughter, Eleanor Sterling, who would go on to serve 6 terms representing the riding, while Senator Kincaid was eventually replaced by his primary challenger, Dr. Fiona MacLeod, who would dedicate the next 30 years to serving Northern interests in the upper chamber. The Kincaid lineage would maintain its prominence in public service, with Andrew's nephew later holding a key position in the provincial government of New Brunswick. The disappearance of CFLX-04 became the definitive cold case for what popular writers and paranormal enthusiasts later termed the Northern Void, a sprawling, wild territory roughly delineated by Whitehorse, Dawson Creek, and Inuvik, where an unusually high number of small aircraft and individuals have seemingly vanished without a rational, final trace. Proponents of supernatural or geomagnetic theories frequently cite the Sterling-Kincaid loss as a prime exhibit that powerful, unexplained forces are at work within this region, underscoring the total absence of any recoverable wreckage and the absolute failure of such a sophisticated search operation to locate a single artifact from the plane. Detractors maintain that the North's notorious topography and severe, volatile weather conditions provide a perfectly adequate explanation for the loss, particularly given the aircraft's noted lack of updated distress equipment and the poor visibility along the high mountain route. Modern technological advancements have recently revitalized public and private interest in finally resolving the 44-year-old enigma, with some investigators hypothesizing that accelerated climate change and the resultant melting of high-altitude ice fields might ultimately reveal the buried wreckage of CFLX-04. Several Canadian military aircraft that were lost in the 1960s and 1970s have been found in recent years as glaciers recede and expose previously covered crash sites, raising hope that the Sterling-Kincaid aircraft might yet be discovered. Advanced investigative tools, including high-resolution satellite mapping, sophisticated synthetic aperture radar, and specialized ground-penetrating systems, have all been proposed for renewed, targeted search efforts. While the sheer, incomprehensible vastness of the potential search area still poses enormous logistical challenges, the legacy of the November 8, 1981 disappearance extends far beyond its immediate electoral consequences, serving as a powerful and sobering testament to the immutable hazards that continue to face aviators operating across the North's uncompromising environment. The case, critically informed. Subsequent federal regulations mandating high-power distress beacons on all commercial aircraft, a measure that has undoubtedly saved lives in later aviation emergencies. More profoundly, the complete vanishing of 2 high-ranking public figures in the vast northern wilderness highlighted the region's inherent isolation and the significant risks embraced by anyone who dares to navigate its interior, whether by air, water, or on foot. Today, the mystery of CFLXGO4 remains one of the nation's most profound unsolved cases, a silent, enduring witness to the wilderness's absolute power to reclaim those who attempt to challenge its dominion. The celestial curtains shivered across the black velvety sky like magnificent banners of sapphire and silver, bathing the secluded mountain retreat, Kodiak Peak's cabins deep in the Cheyenne Ridge area in an eerie, magnificent glow. Clara Beaumont pressed her forehead against the thick glass of her private chalet's window. She was utterly captivated by the celestial veil display, the phenomenon that had drawn her away from the bustling city lights of Toronto to this sanctuary of solitude, 80 miles east of Dawson City. At 48, the accomplished travel photojournalist had dedicated her career to capturing the world's most extreme environments. But the Northern Territory's raw, frozen spectacle represented the ultimate test of her art. The Kodiak Peak's cabins, a cluster of hand-built chalets, reachable only by ski-equipped small plane or specialized tracked vehicle, promised the kind of truly isolated experience that is increasingly rare in modern tourism. Clara had arrived at the lodge 4 days prior aboard a rugged Nordwin Norseman aircraft, piloted by Gus Finley, a hardened local who had been ferrying clients and provisions to isolated outposts for over 3 decades. The 1-hour flight from Dawson City had spanned endless tracts of subarctic taiga interspersed with snow-covered tundra and granite peaks that rose against the sky like the teeth of a saw. The Kodiak Peak's cabins were situated on the fringe of Mirrorstone Lake, a crystalline sheet of ice surrounded by ancient pine forests, accessible only during the brief thaw when planes could land on the water, or in winter when the solid surface could support aircraft outfitted with landing skis. The main complex comprised a central lodge housing the hearth room, mess hall, and the owner's living quarters, ringed by 9 individual guest chalets designed to host up to 25 visitors during the busiest weeks. During Clara's January visit, she was one of only 7 guests sharing the profound stillness with a documentary filmmaker from Seattle, a glaciologist from the University of British Columbia, and an elderly couple from Oregon who were celebrated repeat visitors for over a decade. This small group size fostered a unique, close-knit atmosphere where residents shared fireside stories, hearty meals, and the immense, defining silence of the northern winterscape. Lodge proprietor Ben Travers had taken over the property in 2001 after a career as an Air Force rescue specialist, drawn by the same magnificent solitude that attracted his clientele. He had spent years meticulously upgrading the infrastructure while ensuring its rustic charm remained intact, installing a solar propane hybrid power system, a sophisticated water purification unit, and high-frequency radio equipment capable of contacting first responders in Dawson City despite the vast distances. Travers took personal pride in offering his guests genuine wilderness immersion, while strictly maintaining the rigorous safety protocols informed by his military background and long experience surviving the harsh realities of the northern climate. The evening of January 20th unfolded much like the previous nights at the Kodiak Peak's cabins, with everyone gathering in the main lodge after their supper to exchange notes and watch the northern sky through the massive bay windows facing the Mackenzie Range. Clara had spent her day tracking local fauna in the fresh powder, meticulously documenting the deep, purposeful prints left by caribou herds, Arctic foxes, and the occasional solitary bear that was yet to den up. She had captured breathtaking time-lapses of the wind-sculpted snowdrifts and was eagerly anticipating venturing out later that night if the forecast for the celestial veil held true. Weather conditions that night were perfect for viewing, featuring exceptionally clear air, almost zero wind, and frigid temperatures hovering near 30 degrees C. The local meteorological center had issued a rare forecast predicting high-intensity magnetic activity, and the lodge's remote location, utterly devoid of light pollution, guaranteed an unparalleled view of the northern arc where the brilliant displays typically commenced. Clara had meticulously prepared her specialized camera array earlier, checking the thermal blankets, verifying battery levels, and ensuring her heavy-duty tripod was firmly braced for the extended exposures needed to capture the light's ephemeral dance. Around 11:30 p.m., the first faint wash of violet light appeared above the peaks, quickly escalating into the full-scale, mesmerizing show that had drawn artists from across the globe to the winter north. Clara wrapped herself tightly in multiple layers of Arctic-rated gear, collected her waterproof equipment bags, and stepped out into the crisp, paralyzing night air that instantly flash froze the moisture escaping her lungs. She set up her primary observation point roughly 150 meters from her cabin, near a distinctive, frost-heaved rock formation close to the lake's edge, where she hoped the dark ice would provide stunning reflections of the light show. The other guests soon ventured out as well, some choosing the relative warmth of the lodge's covered porch, while others, like Clara, braved the deep cold to experience the phenomena without barrier. Lodge owner Travers performed his customary checks, circulating among the guests, issuing stern warnings about the swift onset of severe cold exposure and urging anyone feeling fatigued to immediately retreat to a heated space. The ambient temperature had plummeted to 35 degrees C, dangerously cold enough to inflict serious frostbite on exposed skin within minutes, and potentially fatal for anyone improperly insulated against the elements. Clara's demanding photography session continued for close to 2 hours as the celestial veil display reached its climax, with vast, rippling curtains of light spanning the sky in a cosmic ballet that left her momentarily breathless with awe. Her modified, low-temperature camera system operated flawlessly in the extreme environment, recording frame after frame of the otherworldly phenomenon revered by the region's First Nations people. She made intermittent, brief retreats to her chalet to restore feeling to her fingers and recalibrate her lenses, but the incomparable spectacle consistently pulled her back out into the brutal conditions. The final verifiable sighting of Clara occurred around 10:15 a.m. when a fellow guest, the glaciologist Dr. Elias Vance, observed her repositioning her tripod at the lake's very edge while the auroral intensity had begun its slow, graceful fade. Vance had been working from a less exposed spot closer to the main lodge and noticed Clara's dark silhouette against the vast, starlit snowfield as she persisted in her work despite the worsening cold. He briefly considered calling out to her to suggest she retire for the night, but decided against interfering with what appeared to be a highly focused professional working well within her known cold weather capabilities. When Clara failed to appear for the robust morning meal, Travers knocked firmly on her chalet door and found it unlocked. There was no sign that she had returned following her late-night photography vigil. Her entire camera kit was gone, indicating she had been carrying it when whatever event transpired took place. The chalet was otherwise undisturbed. Her remaining gear was stacked neatly, and her bed remained untouched, confirming she had not returned from her midnight expedition. Most critically, her heavy-duty, brightly colored rescue-rated expedition shell, the coat she was seen wearing, was missing from the cabin hook, despite the deadly ambient temperature that made such protection absolutely essential for survival. The search for Clara began instantly. Travers and his one staff member conducted a swift perimeter sweep around the main complex, while the guests scoured the shoreline and marked trails. Royal Canadian Mounted Police were immediately contacted via satellite radio, but a developing whiteout blizzard prevented any immediate helicopter deployment, forcing the critical initial search efforts onto the lodge personnel and guests who fully grasped the gravity of a person exposed in the northern winter. The search was further hampered by heavy snowfall that had begun around 30:30 a.m., effectively wiping away any potential tracks or disturbances that might have indicated Clara's path, or the location where an accident might have occurred. Trained professional search and rescue teams arrived the following afternoon aboard snowmobiles and specialized tracked vehicles, bringing advanced mapping gear and expert tracking dogs bred to detect human scent even beneath deep snowdrifts. The combined team methodically covered expanding search grids radiating from the lodge, focusing heavily on the Mirrorstone Lake perimeter, where Clara was last seen, and any terrain feature that might have presented a hazard in the darkness. Despite this massive commitment of resources, the searchers located no sign of Clara or her expensive camera equipment, an outcome that seemed statistically impossible given the very limited radius she could have traversed on foot in the extreme cold. The search was eventually extended to include aerial sweeps once the weather temporarily cleared, utilizing aircraft equipped with high-resolution forward-looking infrared FLIR technology capable of detecting residual body heat deep within the tree line. Pilots with years of experience in northern SAR operations noted that the pristine snow conditions should have been ideal for preserving any physical evidence of Clara's movements, making the complete absence of tracks or disturbance particularly bewildering. The subsequent helicopter searches covered over 100 square kilometers of the wilderness surrounding the lodge, encompassing remote ravines and windswept ridges where a person might wander if suffering from confusion caused by the cold or a sudden medical event. As the days turned into a grim week without any discovery, theories surrounding her vanishing ranged from sudden hypothermia and fatal animal encounters to more fantastical notions involving unexplained regional phenomena, often linked to the Northern Territory's remoteness. Lodge guests and staff reported strange, distant acoustic anomalies during the cold nights following her disappearance, including prolonged, unnaturally resonant howls that might have been wolves or simply the wind, and faint, inexplicable colored flashes of light that may have been aircraft or an extension of the aurora. These unsettling accounts contributed to a pervasive atmosphere of dread that gripped everyone at the isolated complex. The investigation confirmed that Clara was a highly disciplined cold-weather photographer who deeply respected the peril of the northern environment and reliably adhered to all necessary safety protocols when working under duress. Her professional camera kit included redundancy systems and environmental controls that were expected to perform reliably in the fierce cold. Nevertheless, investigators had to acknowledge that even the most seasoned outdoors experts could be overcome by unexpected, sudden equipment failure or a medical emergency that might rapidly lead to a life-ending outcome in the unforgiving, distant climate. The formal search for Clara was finally terminated after 3 weeks, though lodge owner Travers and neighboring local residents continued intermittent, self-organized searches throughout the remaining winter months. The spring thaw and snow melt revealed no additional clues that could solve the riddle of her disappearance, leaving her friends and family with an agonizing absence of resolution. The Kodiak Peaks cabins continued its operations, but Travers immediately installed advanced tracking devices for guests and implemented much stricter protocols for monitoring anyone venturing out at night. Today, Clara Beaumont's disappearance remains a haunting, unsolved mystery that has been absorbed into the local lore surrounding the Northern Territory's remote wilderness outposts. Her case stands as a chilling testament that even highly prepared adventurers can face hazards that prove insurmountable in the unforgiving northern climate, where emergency aid is often hours, if not a full day, away, and where weather conditions can transform from acceptable to lethal in a matter of minutes. The mesmerizing celestial veil that initially drew her to that frozen lake continues to attract thrill seekers and photographers. Still, Clara's story ensures that all visitors fully grasp the unforgiving, absolute respect that this wilderness demands from everyone who dares to challenge its dominion. August 2021 was the month the subtle bond between me and my father shattered and reformed into something deeper. We'd meticulously planned this elk scouting trip deep within northern Idaho's Blackwood Range for nearly a year. It was our first serious wilderness excursion together since I'd relocated to Denver for my engineering career 4 years prior. I'm 30, work in software infrastructure, and frankly, My visits with the old man had been mostly confined to holiday dinners since my college days. He'd been exploring that specific region for over 25 years. He knew every canyon and watershed like it was the blueprint of his own house. We drove up from Boise in his reliable old Ford F-250, survey equipment secured, lightweight backpacking gear meticulously organized. Both of us were genuinely eager to unplug from the connected world for 6 uninterrupted days. The initial plan was simple: locate fresh elk sign, map out new access routes, and just revel in the profound solitude without the distraction of digital alerts or client calls. The first day unfolded exactly as planned. We trekked roughly 7 miles from the trailhead, establishing a perfect base camp near a winding tributary that sliced through a basin ringed by ancient fir and aspen. Dad carried that familiar sense of command he always possessed outdoors, pointing out subtle trail markers, explaining thermal air currents, recounting tales of past expeditions in the area. The weather was mild but not hot, perhaps 60 degrees F with crystal skies and that brilliant summer light filtering through the dense canopy. We pitched our modern tent, stowed our food properly, and spent the evening going over contour maps for the next day while sipping a thermos of iced tea fortified with bourbon. Everything felt comfortable, even restorative. We were both pleasantly tired from the hike, talking casually about my sister's wedding, his retirement plans, general anxieties. Neither of us realized that our presence had already been noted. The unsettling events began on day 2. We'd been hiking for about 4 hours, tracing this high country path that climbed up past a series of sheer granite formations. Dad abruptly froze. He was staring at a spot about 40 yards ahead, his face shifting from relaxed concentration to sheer bewilderment. When I reached his side, I saw the sight that had stopped him. Scattered pieces of what had been a bighorn sheep, but unlike any predator kill either of us had ever encountered. The bones were stripped completely clean, almost mechanically precise. But the truly bizarre element was the arrangement. They weren't scattered haphazardly as a coyote or cougar would leave them. Instead, the remnants formed an unnerving geometric shape, almost a rough pentagon, centered around a smooth, light-colored river rock. The skull was positioned precisely in the center, its vacant eye sockets gazing at the afternoon sky, and the ribs radiated outward like segments of a sundial. Dad knelt beside the remains, gently touching the razor-sharp edges of the bones. He'd spent over 20 years in these woods, seen scores of kills left by bears, wolf packs, and mountain lions. But this was alien. The bones were too immaculate, too unnervingly symmetrical, and there wasn't a single print anywhere in the soft soil surrounding the site. Not a partial claw mark or a disturbance in the moss. "Ethan," he whispered, using my old nickname, which he reserved for moments of true gravity. "I've never seen anything approach this." Whatever took this sheep was powerful enough to dispatch it instantly, but intelligent enough to erase all evidence of its presence. We wasted another 15 minutes meticulously surveying the area, casting wider and wider circles, but found absolutely nothing. No trace of hair, no blood spatter, no broken undergrowth. It was as if the creature had simply materialized, executed this display with surgical accuracy, and dematerialized into the forest air. We attempted to dismiss it and press on with our scouting, but the discovery had undeniably put both of us on edge. Dad kept glancing nervously back toward the bone circle, and I found myself scrutinizing the shadows beneath the trees far more often than necessary. About 3 miles farther up the trail, we discovered a second arrangement. This time, a large raven, but again, the remains were organized in that same unsettling, precise pattern. The small wing bones formed a perfect miniature ring around a darkened volcanic stone, with the small beak positioned exactly at its core. What made it even more disturbing was that ravens are aerial creatures. There were no telltale feathers anywhere nearby. No signs of struggle. Dad picked up one of the tiny leg bones, holding it toward the light, showing me how cleanly the tissue had been removed. "This is forensic level work," he muttered, his voice hoarse. No natural scavenger cleans with this kind of exacting detail. The pattern persisted throughout the afternoon. We located 4 more sites, each more disturbing than the last. A ground squirrel arranged around a shard of obsidian, a pine marten skeleton forming a perfect spiral around a flat piece of slate. Every single location was pristine, sterile, with that same eerie precision that made the hair on my neck prickle. What truly disturbed me was the escalation. The first bighorn had clearly been there for weeks, but the most recent discoveries still retained the faint, metallic scent of recent death. Dad's posture changed. He kept his knife sheathed but ready, constantly checking the trail behind us. Neither of us would articulate it, but we both realized something was not just observing, but actively tracking our progress, staying just ahead of us to prepare these gruesome announcements. It felt like we were being deliberately guided deeper into its domain, following a breadcrumb trail of escalatingly fresh kills that served as both a territorial marker and a perverse invitation. That night, we established camp in a small, dense thicket surrounded by massive firs. Both of us were too mentally drained to push further. Dad insisted we keep our small stove burning brightly all night, taking shifts on watch, something we'd never done on previous trips. I took the final shift, sitting against my pack, binoculars across my lap, listening intently to every crackle of the fire and rustle of the wind just beyond its protective light. Around 4:30 a.m. during my shift, I heard a slight subtle hiss, Dad breathing out sharply behind me. I turned my head slowly, and he was pointing toward the boundary of the thicket, his face ashen in the faint moonlight. "There," he whispered, his voice shaking barely perceptibly. "Between those 2 twin firs. Look close." I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw them. 2 immense amber-colored eyes reflecting the stove light, positioned roughly 7 feet off the ground, completely static. They didn't possess the typical blue or red eyeshine of a common deer or bear, but an intense, almost golden yellow hue that seemed to glow with predatory intellect. The eyes watched us for what felt like an eternal stretch of time, but was perhaps only 20 minutes. They never blinked, never shifted position, only maintained that steady, utterly calculating stare that made my limbs feel heavy and cold. Dad had his rifle resting on his knees, ready, but neither of us could discern any body shape or outline in the profound darkness behind those eyes. Whatever was watching us was enormous. The height of the eyes alone suggested something far larger than any grizzly or bull elk I'd ever seen. The most terrifying aspect was the absolute silence. No sounds of breath, no shifting of the needles beneath its weight, no movement of the lower branches. Just those unblinking eyes, studying us with what felt like infinite, patient hostility. When the pre-dawn glow finally began to filter down through the canopy, the eyes simply vanished. One moment they were there. The next, they were gone, as if a curtain had been drawn. We meticulously searched the area once the light was strong enough, but found no broken branches, no compressed moss, no physical proof that anything massive had stood there. Day 3 finalized our terror. We'd been hiking for about 5 hours, both of us paranoid and sleepless, when we reached the saddle overlooking the main canyon. Dad was using his rangefinder to locate potential trail crossings when he suddenly froze, locking up completely. "Holy Mother," he choked out, passing me the rangefinder with a violently shaking hand. "Tell me that's a hallucination." I adjusted the focus and directed the optics where he was pointing. There it was. Standing on the opposite ridge, perhaps 900 yards away, was the largest canid I'd ever witnessed. But calling it a wolf felt like an insult to its scale. This thing was gargantuan, easily the size of a compact car, with massive jowls and shoulders that seemed unnaturally broad. Its fur was a profound, deep black, save for strange silvery streaks along its mane that caught the sunlight like polished steel. What made my chest pound was the way it was standing, utterly still, face directly toward us, as if it had been patiently waiting for us to crest that precise spot. The creature stood there for nearly 3 minutes, just staring through what must have been astonishing natural vision. Even at that range, I felt the sheer weight of its focus, like it was downloading every aspect of our stance and equipment. Dad frantically fumbled with his rifle, trying to find a stable firing position, but the distance made a clean, ethical shot impossible. Then, without any preliminary movement, the creature turned and began loping along the ridgeline with a fluid, almost impossible grace that defied its bulk. It moved like a flowing shadow, covering ground with unbelievable speed, while maintaining perfect, effortless balance on ground that would demand 4 points of contact from a skilled mountain climber. What solidified my fear was its behavior. Every 100 yards or so, it would halt, pivot back toward us, and wait just long enough for us to track its movement before continuing its patrol. It was demonstrably showing us that it could outpace us with ease, that it had been in full command of this entire encounter from the outset. That's when the horrifying truth coalesced for me. The bone arrangements, the freshness of the kills escalating as we plunged deeper into the region, the silent nighttime surveillance, and now this calculated, terrifying display of dominance. We weren't scouting in its territory. We were being corralled by it. This wasn't some random territorial grizzly. This was something far more sentient, far more deliberate. The creature had been monitoring us for the entire trip, staying just out of sight while leaving those grotesque signposts to announce its presence and guide our direction. Dad must have reached the same grim conclusion because he gripped my shoulder and said, "We leave. Now." This thing has been playing a long game. We packed our gear with panic speed, abandoning all thoughts of continuing the expedition. As we began our frantic descent back toward the valley floor, I risked one last look through the rangefinder. The enormous Khaneed was still there, sitting now like an ancient stone-like statue, watching our retreat with an expression that I swear looked like profound, satisfied patience. The hike back to our truck took us 9 grueling hours of non-stop, desperate walking, both of us constantly scanning the higher elevations and the dense tree line. We spoke very little during the descent, but I knew Dad was wrestling with the same unbearable realization that consumed me. That massive Khaneed had been the conductor of our entire experience since day one. Every bone site, every strange arrangement, every pulse of growing anxiety had been meticulously timed and planned to lure us deeper into its environment until it chose the moment for its final, terrifying reveal. When we finally reached the ford, Dad threw our packs into the bed with violently shaking hands and started the engine before I'd even secured my seatbelt. As we sped down the logging road, I watched the wilderness recede in the side mirror, certain I could still feel those golden eyes drilling into our backs. We never went back to that area, and Dad sold all his remote camping equipment the following spring. Neither of us has ever explicitly discussed the events of those 3 days, but I know we both share the understanding that we had encountered something that defies classification. An apex intelligence operating with calculated, near-supernatural awareness. And we had been extraordinarily fortunate to be allowed to leave its territory alive. My name is Marcus Vance, and I've been a contract hauler for Polar Transit Logistics for 15 years. I handle the extreme long hauls through the Great Northwest Territory, the runs that intimidate most drivers because they're too isolated or too treacherous for conventional travel. I've dropped freight at remote seismic survey sites, delivered fuel to weather observatories, frozen solid 9 months a year, and supplied tiny settlements that only see a transport every 6 weeks. I honestly believed I had mastered every challenge these frozen dirt tracks could present. I was gravely mistaken. It began 8 months ago when my younger sister, Lena, became involved with a secretive spiritual collective known as the Ascension Doctrine of the Peaks. Lena had always been adrift, jumping from one philosophy to another. Various self-help gurus, esoteric retreats, anything to fill a profound emptiness inside her. When she informed our family that she was relocating to a shared compound deep in the wilderness, we desperately tried to intervene. But Lena was 27 and fiercely independent. She insisted she had finally discovered her purpose, her sacred duty. The communication with her ceased after just 3 weeks. When my mother's anxiety became debilitating, I knew I had to act. That's when I volunteered to take over the monthly cargo drop to the Ascension Doctrine of the Peaks. My supervisor, Ron, was resistant. He claimed the route was jinxed, that 3 separate drivers had refused the delivery permanently after their first run. But I needed to see Lena with my own eyes. I needed to confirm she was safe. The isolated compound sat deep within the Northern Rockies foothills, accessible only by a rudimentary, muddy logging track that twisted through thick evergreen forest for over 4 hours. No cellular coverage, no emergency radio frequency, nothing but granite and timber for scores of miles in every direction. My vehicle's digital map failed within the first hour, forcing me to rely on the crude, hand-drawn sketch Ron had reluctantly provided. The track was barely wide enough for my Kenworth T880, scarred with deep divots that caused the entire cab to violently shudder and groan. When I finally pulled up to the Ascension Doctrine of the Peaks, the initial thing that struck me was the pervasive, unnatural silence. No dogs barking, no sound of work being performed, no expected noise of human activity. Just stillness, broken only by the wind soughing through the trees. The collection of structures looked deceptively normal. A main assembly hall surrounded by several rough-hewn cabins, with designated areas for cultivation and small animals. But I felt a profound sense of wrongness the second I killed the engine. People emerged to assist with the offloading. That's when I first registered their eyes. Every individual possessed this vacant, hollow gaze, as if they were moving through a deep trance. Their movements were sluggish, robotic, and their speech was delivered in low, monotonous tones. No one smiled. No one showed any emotion. They simply performed their tasks while staring blankly into the distance. Lena appeared as I was moving the final few pallets of dry goods. I barely recognized her. She looked shockingly thin, having lost at least 40 pounds. Her skin was pale and drawn, and her distinctive curly hair had been shorn short and unevenly. But the most alarming detail was the fresh, precise, circular scarring burned onto both her palms. They looked recent and excruciating. "Lena," I called, rushing forward to embrace her. She remained utterly stiff in my arms, not returning the hug. "Hello, Marcus," she replied in the same emotionless cadence as the others. "Shepherd Malachi informed us you would be bringing the provisions now." I held her hands, examining the burn marks. "What happened to you?" "What are these?" "Cleansing rites," she stated without expression. "Shepherd Malachi teaches us that suffering brings us closer to the Creator's divine presence." Shepherd Malachi materialized before I could ask any further questions. He was a powerfully built man in his late 50s, with striking white hair and intense green eyes that felt like they were peeling back my very thoughts. He wore the same simple linen clothing as the others, but his posture radiated absolute authority and total control. "You must be Lena's kinsman," he said, offering his hand. His grip was cold and uncomfortably prolonged. "Welcome to the Ascension Doctrine of the Peaks. We are deeply honored to have you deliver the Source's nourishment." As he spoke, I observed his constant physical contact with his followers, a hand resting on a neck, fingers trailing on an elbow, always some form of deliberate touch. And the followers' reactions, a barely perceptible flinch, yet they never pulled away, as if paralyzed by fear of offending him. "Your sister has proven to be an exceptional devotee to our family," Shepherd Malachi continued, now placing both hands firmly on Lena's shoulders. She visibly tensed, closing her eyes as though seeking escape. "She has embraced the path of true sacrifice and total devotion. They insisted I remain for the evening meal, citing the approach of darkness and the dangerous nature of the trail." The main assembly hall featured communal long tables where the entire collective, roughly 50 people, ate together, all sharing those same vacant eyes and hushed voices. They served a thick, dark stew with root vegetables sourced from their cultivation beds. The meat had a peculiar flavor, intensely savory, almost too rich, with a sweetness I couldn't quite identify, yet it felt disturbingly recognizable. "What animal is this meat from?" I asked Shepherd Malachi, who presided at the head table. He offered that same cold, flawless smile. "The source provides for its humble servants," he responded. "We are eternally grateful for this abundance." I glanced over at Lena, who was consuming the stew avidly, wiping her bowl clean with her fingers after every spoonful. For the first time all day, she appeared content, truly content. She noticed my scrutiny and offered a wide smile. But it wasn't the smile of my sister. It was a mask of something else entirely, worn over Lena's face. That night, I was assigned a cramped cot in one of the outlying structures. I lay awake listening to the wind outside, but around 1:30 a.m., I heard a distinct sound, a low, resonant chanting from somewhere deep in the woods. I cautiously rose and looked through the window, but saw only impenetrable blackness. The chanting intensified, becoming more frenetic, and I could see a flickering amber light through a gap in the trees. Against my every rational impulse, I quietly dressed and slipped outside. Following the faint glow, I navigated the uneven ground until I reached a wide clearing where a massive, roaring pyre was burning. The entire collective was gathered, forming a wide circle around the intense heat, chanting in a strange, guttural dialect I'd never encountered. Shepherd Malachi stood at the center, his arms outstretched toward the night sky. That's when I saw what they were feeding the fire: human remains, limbs, severed torsos, sections of bone, all freshly butchered, still slick with blood. The horrifying scent of burning human fat and tissue overwhelmed the cold air, and I violently gagged to keep from vomiting. But the absolute worst moment was seeing Lena in that circle, her eyes glazed over with that same predatory look, holding what was unquestionably a human skull by its remaining hair. Shepherd Malachi was delivering a frantic sermon about consuming the profane and achieving unity with the chosen flesh. The community roared their responses, their voices rising and falling with demented, religious ecstasy. I realized with escalating panic that these people were not just incinerating human remains. They were meticulously preparing them, utilizing them for their rituals, turning abduction and murder into some vile sacred ceremony. And the meat from dinner, that sickly, sweet, familiar taste. Dear God, I recognized it now. I tried to retreat quietly, but my boot landed on a dead branch that snapped with the sound of a pistol shot. Two figures instantly grabbed me from behind and forcefully dragged me toward a smaller outbuilding I hadn't noticed before. It was a windowless shack with a reinforced wooden door. The basement below was a nightmare. It was filled with cages, rudimentary cells built from rusty wire fencing and heavy padlocks, each one holding a captive. Men, women, even adolescents, all in various states of terror and brutal injury. Some were missing fingers. Others had toes amputated, with chunks of flesh visibly carved from their upper thighs and shoulders. They were being kept alive, given just enough sustenance to prolong their lives, ensuring their meat remained tender and fresh for future celebrations. "Please," a man closest to my capture whispered, his voice thin with exhaustion. They've been eating my little girl piece by piece for weeks. They saved her hands for their harvest festival. I had to watch them use her bones for their instruments. I began hyperventilating. The full, monstrous scope of this reality crushed me. These people weren't just misguided religious zealots. They were organized, calculated human predators who lured victims to their remote trap, then systematically butchered and consumed them during their horrific sacraments. Shepherd Malachi appeared at the top of the rough-hewn stairs, carrying a flickering oil lamp that threw chaotic, dancing shadows across the concrete walls. "The source has delivered you to us, Marcus, as a truly valuable offering," he stated in that same tranquil, benevolent tone. "You will help provide for the faithful for many long months." He calmly outlined how they would sustain me, taking small, manageable portions at a time to maximize my longevity. "We shall start with your toes," he announced, stroking my jawline as if I were a prized breeding animal. "Then proceed to the more desirable cuts. Your liver will be perfect for our communion bread." Lena descended the stairs directly behind him, carrying a long, curved butcher's knife that looked disturbingly well-maintained. But this was no longer my sister. Her empathy was utterly extinguished, replaced by something cold, hungry, and fundamentally broken. She looked at me with the detached appraisal of a professional chef, discussing which parts of my body would be best suited for different preparations. "His ribs will make an exquisite, savory broth," she declared in a voice completely drained of human warmth. "And I've always wondered what brother's flesh tastes like." Shepherd Malachi showed me a leather-bound register documenting every person they had consumed over the last 3 years. Detailed, meticulous notes on flavor, texture, preferred cooking methods, and which cuts were judged superior. Several entries described the consumption of infants and small children, rating their flesh as sweet and remarkably tender, ideal for their high holidays. Over 60 victims, all systematically transformed into religious ritual that bound the community together in their shared atrocity. My opportunity for escape arrived when the cultists brought down a screaming, bound family of 5. A father, mother, and 3 small children who must have stopped their vehicle on the main road asking for directions. In the sheer bedlam that erupted as the other prisoners seized the opportunity to attempt a break, I managed to slip my nylon restraints and bolt for the stairs. The compound instantly devolved into chaos. "No!" Cult members were hunting escaping prisoners with crude axes and clubs, while others desperately tried to regain control. I ran flat out from my delivery truck, clumsily fumbling with the ignition keys as the screams and cries echoed through the forest behind me. But Lena was waiting. She sprang onto the hood with a heavy meat cleaver in her hand, her face smeared with someone else's blood. She started hacking wildly through the windshield, shrieking that I was stealing the source's provision and that my flesh belonged to their community. "You are forbidden to leave," she shrieked, bringing the cleaver down again and again. "Shepherd Malachi needs you. We need you." I slammed the truck into drive and floored the accelerator. Lena desperately clung on, still swinging the cleaver and cackling with a terrifying, childlike joy. I had to swerve violently, a sickening, deliberate maneuver to dislodge her, and I felt the profound, sickening thud-thud as my own sister went beneath the heavy wheels. Even then, even as her life was ending, she was laughing and praising her dark god. I drove straight to the nearest RCMP detachment in Whitehorse. But by the time they organized an intervention team using helicopter surveillance, the compound was already engulfed in flames. They located partially consumed bodies strewn around the property, overwhelming evidence of the cannibalistic rites. But the majority of the cult had vanished into the vast wilderness. Lena's body was never recovered among the ashes. Sometimes I received packages in the mail. Unmarked, ordinary boxes containing strips of what appears to be dehydrated meat with no return address. I know she is still alive, out there with the other survivors, likely establishing a new congregation somewhere utterly unreachable. The worst element is not the crippling PTSD, the constant, draining therapy, or losing my job because I can no longer tolerate those isolated routes. The worst element is the certain knowledge that Lena made this choice. She wasn't merely brainwashed or coerced. She found genuine, intense pleasure in consuming human flesh. In her final moments beneath my truck, she was smiling and chewing on a piece of raw meat from her last victim. I've seen missing person flyers from the areas where the survivors reportedly fled, and I know they are rebuilding their twisted communion somewhere new. Sometimes, when I accept temporary delivery work to remote spiritual retreats, because I still need to earn a living, still have bills to settle, I wonder if I am unwittingly supplying another group of human predators. The intense, sweet taste of that stew still haunts me, because I know now it was someone's missing child. Someone who was deeply loved and is still being searched for. And the agonizing realization that keeps me wide awake at night, the piece of truth that makes me loathe my own existence, is that in those few bites, before the full horror dawned on me, part of my brain registered it as utterly, undeniably delicious. May the Creator have mercy on my soul. When landscape artist Eleanor Eliza Vane from Boston packed her duffels for a 6-week solo expedition to the Canadian Yukon in October 2022, she had no premonition that she was embarking on a puzzle that would haunt her family for generations. At 39, Eliza had earned acclaim for capturing nature's most transient moments. The elusive snow leopard blending into a cliff face, the precise moment a glacier calves into the sea, the intricate geometry of a single perfect snowflake under magnification. Her work had been featured in prestigious nature journals and global travel magazines, but it was her lifelong fascination with the celestial veil, the aurora borealis, that finally pulled her to the high north. Eliza's obsession with the light show began during her childhood. Inspired by folklore her grandfather shared about the First Nations people of the North and their legends regarding the dancing ancestral spirits in the sky. She had spent years documenting aurora displays in Iceland, Norway, and northern Quebec. But the Yukon represented the summit of her quest, the place where the lights were rumored to be the most active and least predictable. Her plan was audacious, a solo month-and-a-half expedition during the magnetic peak season, moving between highly remote sites far from any town glow, utilizing custom-built, slow-shutter arrays to capture images no one had yet achieved. Her partner, Michael, initially resisted the idea. Eliza had a reputation for risk-taking, once spending 2 weeks alone in the Gobi Desert, documenting extreme weather cycles. Another time, she had camped for 15 days in a Labrador deep freeze to photograph a specific meteorological event. But the Yukon presented a new level of danger. The distances were staggering, the climate ferocious, and the isolation absolute. Eliza reassured him she would transmit a status update via high-frequency radio every 72 hours and carried redundant emergency locator beacons. She had thoroughly researched every element of the journey, from historical ice formations to migratory bird routes, and had even secured permission from local authorities for access to restricted territories. On October 14th, Eliza flew into Whitehorse with 5 custom cases of photographic gear, specialized Class 5 cold weather suits, and a reinforced tracked utility vehicle equipped with a pressurized observation dome. Her initial 10 days were incredibly successful. She captured breathtaking images near the Takini Hot Springs and radioed Michael photographs of the celestial veil that surpassed anything in her professional portfolio. The lights that week were unusually dynamic, stretching across the hemisphere in vast sheets of indigo and gold that she described as conscious energy. Her first mandated communication arrived exactly on schedule. Her voice was vibrant and professional as she detailed the clarity of the northern atmosphere and her immediate plan to head farther north toward the Dempster Highway. She mentioned that the aurora forecasts indicated a rare solar wind surge that had the potential to produce truly once-in-a-lifetime displays. Eliza confirmed she was pushing her northern trajectory to maximize her exposure to these conditions. By October 26th, Eliza had set up a base near Eagle Plains, a tiny checkpoint along the Dempster Highway that primarily served as a winter haven for maintenance crews and long-haul truckers. The few permanent residents who met her remembered her intense focus and her extravagant camera rig, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of precision gear that she handled with the reverence of a curator. She spent 2 evenings sharing her initial photographs with other travelers at the tiny roadside diner, patiently explaining her multi-exposure techniques for documenting light movement. Her next communication came on October 29th, but the tone was chillingly different. Eliza's voice on the radio was taut, almost gasping. She reported to Michael that she was recording impossible structures within the celestial veil displays, formations that defied every established atmospheric physics model she knew. She mentioned that the light seemed to be monitoring her actions, intensifying dramatically when she activated her cameras and fading rapidly when she packed up her tripod. Michael later recalled feeling a profound dread during the call, noting that Eliza sounded both intensely exhilarated and utterly terrified, as if she had unveiled a secret too enormous to comprehend. That was the last confirmed contact anyone had with Eleanor Vane. When she failed to make her mandated check-in on November 1st, Michael immediately alerted the RCMP. The search commenced within hours, concentrating on the region around Eagle Plains, where she was last known to be working. The terrain north of the Arctic Circle is merciless. Vast stretches of frozen tundra segmented by abrupt ravines, thousands of small ponds, and conditions that can shift from clear sky serenity to paralyzing whiteout in a moment. Search teams located Eliza's utility truck on November 4th, abandoned on a barely used service road approximately 20 kilometers northwest of Eagle Plains. The vehicle was unlocked, with no sign of forced entry or mechanical failure. Her sleeping bag and most of her reserve clothing were still inside. What most concerned the searchers was the absence of her primary imaging equipment, hundreds of thousands of dollars in specialized cameras that Eliza would never, under any circumstances, leave behind. The discovery that brought the search teams to a standstill came 3 kilometers from the vehicle. Eliza's main Phase 1 medium-format camera, an incredibly valuable piece of technology, was found partially concealed beneath a drift of snow, as if it had been placed there with deliberate intention. The camera was entirely intact and still contained its memory drive. When investigators reviewed the digital files, they found over 1,000 celestial veil images, each more spectacular than the last. But it was the final sequence of photographs that defied all known scientific explanation. The last 62 images on Eliza's camera showed the celestial veil in structural formations that atmospheric scientists universally deemed impossible. Instead of the expected shimmering curtains or flowing spirals, the lights had formed distinct, rigid geometric shapes, complex octagons, perfectly interwoven Mandelbrot-like patterns, and mathematical structures that appeared to pulse with deliberate, conscious rhythm. More profoundly disturbing were the final 15 photographs, which clearly appeared to show non-human silhouettes within the aurora itself. Dark, elongated figures that seemed to move independently of the electromagnetic light patterns surrounding them. Digital forensics conducted by the Federal Science Directorate confirmed that the images had not been digitally altered. The metadata indicated they were captured over an 8-hour span on the night of October 30th, with timestamps showing Eliza had photographed continuously from 10:00 p.m. until 6:00 a.m. The sequence of images indicated she had been moving steadily north-northwest across the tundra, following the light displays as they traversed the sky. The most haunting revelation came from the camera's internal GPS logs. The coordinates showed Eliza had followed an almost perfectly straight trajectory for over 5 miles across terrain that would have been nearly impassable in the deep darkness, even with high-end night vision gear. The calculated line of travel led directly toward a cluster of small lakes that were mysteriously frozen solid despite the relatively early season. Wiccan tribal elders consulted by the RCMP pointed out that the specific lakes Eliza approached were historically considered highly restricted territory sites, where their oral tradition taught that the spirits of the Vale came to rest after their nightly dance. Ground searches in the immediate vicinity located Eliza's footprints, clearly identifiable from the unique tread pattern of her heavy boots. The tracks started at her truck and followed the same rigid, straight-line path indicated by her camera's GPS data. But like so many northern disappearances, the footprints simply ended. At the shoreline of the largest frozen lake, Eliza's tracks reached the ice, then vanished completely. There was no evidence that the ice had cracked, no sign that she had fallen through, and absolutely no tracks leading away in any direction. Dive teams eventually searched the lake months later after the ice thickened sufficiently, but they found no trace of Eliza or the remainder of her expensive equipment. The lake bottom was unusually deep and clear, with visibility allowing searchers to confirm there was nothing there to be found. The sonar search did reveal one distinct anomaly, a perfectly circular depression on the lake floor, approximately 40 feet in diameter, where no aquatic growth could be detected, as if the lake bed had been subjected to immense heat or pressure. Eliza's partner Michael hired independent investigators who spent months chasing down every possible lead. They interviewed truckers who used the Dempster Highway, contacted amateur aurora watchers who might have been in the region, and even consulted with university researchers studying high-altitude electromagnetic disturbances. None of the supplemental investigations yielded any solid answers. The case instantly attracted the interest of fringe science and unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP. Researchers who cited the geometric aurora formations in Eliza's final photographs as key evidence of advanced, non-terrestrial interaction. Mainstream atmospheric scientists discounted these theories but offered no credible, alternative explanation for the rigid, mathematical light structures captured in her images. More disturbingly, similar reports began surfacing from other northern photographers. Multiple individuals contacted authorities claiming they had experienced near-identical phenomena, celestial veil displays that seemed to react to their proximity, geometric formations found nowhere in academic literature, and an overwhelming, inexplicable compulsion to follow the lights much farther north than planned. 2 veteran photographers reported a loss of several hours of memory during their aurora sessions, later waking up miles from their intended campsites with no conscious recollection of how they got there. The established scientific community remains deeply divided on Eliza's photographs. Some atmospheric physicists suggest the anomalous formations could be explained by extremely rare, localized magnetic plasma interactions during the peak solar surge. Others emphatically point out that aurora displays are constantly logged by automated observatories across the north, and none have ever recorded similar complex geometric patterning. The non-human silhouettes were largely dismissed as pareidolia, the human mind's tendency to impose familiar figures onto random patterns. Michael Vane vehemently disagreed. He spent the first anniversary of Eliza's disappearance in the Yukon, meticulously retracing her final route and speaking with anyone who might have information. He described feeling a powerful, unexplained magnetic pull toward the north during his time there, and reported that the celestial veil displays he witnessed seemed to move with unsettling intent and awareness. He eventually established a private fund, offering a substantial reward for any information regarding Eliza's fate. But the leads have since dwindled to nothing. Eliza's camera, with its final impossible images, remains locked in the RCMP evidence vault. Researchers occasionally petition for access to study the photographs, but none have provided a conclusive, universally accepted explanation for what Eliza documented during her last hours. The images have been quietly referenced in select academic papers on upper atmosphere phenomena, always accompanied by careful disclaimers regarding their unexplained nature. Local outfitters in the Eagle Plains region now relay Eliza's story to tourists, often as a necessary warning about the required respect for the Yukon wilderness. But some of the older guides, particularly those rooted in Gwich'in tradition, offer a different interpretation. They speak of the celestial veil as a sentient presence, ancient spirits that selectively summon highly sensitive individuals. In their version, Eliza was not lost or consumed. She was called, chosen by a force that exists beyond the boundary of human comprehension, to join something larger than herself. Whether approached through the objective lens of science or the profound lens of spirituality, Eleanor Vane's disappearance remains one of the territory's most vexing cold cases. Her final photographs stand as the sole testament to her last journey, cryptic images that generate far more disturbing questions than they answer. Somewhere in the boundless expanse of the northern Yukon, beyond the reach of search grids and high-frequency radio, lies the key to what occurred when a photographer followed the dancing lights too far into the ultimate unknown. Until that answer is revealed, Eliza's story serves as an eternal reminder that the North holds mysteries that may well be beyond human capacity to understand, and that some obsessions carry a cost that is impossible to calculate until the final payment is due.